Cloud. Thank you, robot. All right, and with that, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Kel Rossiter. Kel is someone that I know through the guiding community. He's a fully certified IFMGA mountain guide through the American Mountain Guides Association. That basically means that he's fully certified in all the disciplines that there are. So fully certified rock guide, ice, alpine, and ski mountaineering. He's also the founder and owner of Adventure Spirit Guides based in Vermont. They provide rock and ice climbing, alpine climbing, and experiences around the country and in the Northeast here. Kel has an impressive climbing resume. Denali has climbed around the world, most recently returned from an ice climbing trip in Newfoundland that looks pretty incredible. He's a former member of the board of directors at Crags, Vermont. So he's very familiar with the work of LCOs and crag management. He's formerly on the board. Now he is a committed volunteer engaged at Crags, Vermont. I also had to, for this next part, I had the Ragged Mountain Foundation fact checkers go through this, and this is 100% true. Kel has a doctorate in education and leadership policy studies from the University of Vermont. He has a master's in kinesiology and outdoor education from the University of New Hampshire. He received an executive certificate from Georgetown in nonprofit management and a BA in philosophy and political science from the College of William and Mary. So he knows of what he speaks. He's a great educator. I've had the pleasure of being a student of his in some clinics he taught in an AMJ meeting. So you're all in for a treat. So we're very fortunate to have him for the next 90 minutes or so. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Kel Rossiter. Take it away, sir.
Yeah, hey, good evening, and thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate your attendance, and I appreciate your input along the way. Tonight, I'm going to be presenting about recreation ecology, fundamentals for climbers and climbing organizations. And imagine you arrive at the parking lot at the crag, and you're on your walk into the crag, and along the way, you step in some kind of crap. Maybe it's dog, maybe it's something else. Or in that parking lot, graffiti keeps showing up on the kiosk that you worked so hard to put together to help educate climbers in your area. Or maybe as you're walking in, you see people continuing to walk across that piece of private property, and that's jeopardizing access to your climbing area. All of those are problems. All of those are problems that all of you involved in your local climbing organizations are familiar with. The thing is, with all of those problems, each may demand a different kind of an approach, a different kind of a strategy, and a different kind of a solution. And that's what I'm here to talk with y'all about tonight. As Nate alluded to, I studied educational leadership and policy studies. And as a part of that, this was a decade ago, as a part of that, I studied recreation ecology. Now, I'm not the most cutting edge, current, up-to-date academic in the world of recreation ecology, but I think that tonight I can give you some nuts and bolts on recreation ecology and some great tools and concepts and strategies for you in dealing with the problems you face at your crag. Now, since completing my doctoral degree, as Nate said, I went more into the world of AMGA and into guiding in my own guide operation. And last year, Nate and I were both at a single pitch instructor provider continuing education program, and we were asked to present a short topic, and my topic was recreation ecology. I gave that presentation, and Nate kind of liked a little bit of what he heard there, and he invited me to potentially put together a bit of a longer presentation for local climbing organizations. And Nate worked hard to organize that and advertise that and put that on. And so I really appreciate his efforts in doing so. And while we're at it, we should point out that Nate just recently won the Access Fund's Climbing Advocate Award. So quick round of applause for Nate. Thank you very much, Nate. Yeah, well, so this is, of course, a Zoom presentation. And I'm going to work hard to deliver information, but to also make it as interactive as possible. As Nate said, we're going to do that by way of raising your hand via Zoom. A little yellow hand pops up. Nate knows that you've raised your hand and that and that you're ready to contribute some kind of an input. Or sometimes we'll do that for like a little bit of a poll, perhaps. So that's how we'll run things. Please do pay attention to your microphone and make sure that once you're done speaking, it goes back to mute. So that's what we're looking at, recreation ecology. And all of you all are actually recreation ecology professionals. All day long at your crags, you're swimming in it. You know the problems out there. You know the access and the impact issues. You all have tons of experience with recreation ecology, but that experience is a bit like water. It's kind of amorphous. Maybe you see something, but you don't quite have a name for it or kind of like how to categorize it. My goal tonight is to give you a bit of a container for taking everything you already do know and putting it into some kind of a more usable format as you all go about making decisions for your crags. So that's what we're up to tonight. Now, we're a big group, so I'm going to forego the intros, but I'd like to start off with a question. The one that Nate had alluded to is, what are the major impact issues your crags are facing? And Nate, are you able to give me a quick little highlight of maybe a couple of the primary impact issues?
For sure, Kel. Yeah, there's there's a lot of alignment, honestly, on these. Some of it is education and over by undereducated. Parking comes up a number of times, either overcrowding or over parking, major problem.
Sure.
3 or 4 votes for that. Most of this, I see some erosion control listed a couple of times. Mostly, I think it just seems to be like pain or impacts from the increased user days or in just basically increase in activity at the cliffs, causing erosion impacts.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, those all seem like very pertinent, very salient issues. And we are going to be looking at all of those. And in this presentation, as a bit of an overview, we're going to start by looking at, well, for starters, what is recreation ecology? And then we're going to look at categories of impact, like figuring out what kind of impact is occurring in a particular situation so that we can better understand it. Then we're going to examine why those impacts might occur. What are the human behaviors and the human psychology that is perhaps allowing or creating that impact problem? And then not lastly, but also, we're going to investigate the ways in which LCOs, that's an acronym for local climbing organizations, if people aren't familiar with that. And that's an acronym I'm going to be using a fair bit tonight, is LCOs. We're going to investigate the ways that LCOs and individuals can influence climber behavior and curb impacts. Lastly, with whatever time remains, I really hope we have an opportunity to draw on your experiences and set up a forum for sharing your LCOs, experiences, and successes. So with that as the overview, let's get things underway. Big picture, we're going to be looking at the problems. You all already know the problems. We're going to take a look at some of those underlying causes. What is causing these problems in terms of human motivations and behaviors? And then based on those human motivations and behaviors, perhaps considering the most effective solutions given those problems. And then lastly, with all the experience this group I know has, my hope is that we will be able to have a forum for some takeaways at the end and successes you've had in mitigating impacts. So let's start at the beginning. What is recreation ecology? Well, before we jump into what is recreation ecology, can anybody name this crag in the picture on the left there? Do we have any winners? Anybody? Boston area climbers?
The Quincy Quarry to me.
Okay, thank you, Nate. All right. Yeah, that is Quincy Quarry. And I think we can all see all kinds of impact happening at Quincy Quarry. A great place to do some urban climbing, but also heavily affected by user impacts. And that's exactly what recreation ecology is. It's the scientific study of environmental impacts that result from recreational activity in protected natural areas. And It includes 3 category areas. Biophysical research, that would be, for example, looking at, well, the impacts on soil compaction from trail travel, or maybe that might include, say, erosion, trail erosion, and how it affects silting in various streams nearby. That'd be one area. The second area would be carrying capacity planning. That might look like determining for a particular campsite how many campers could comfortably and safely inhabit the area. And then the third area, that's what we really want to focus on. That is the methods for influencing visitor behavior. We're gonna dive into that right now. But before we dive into that, we need to think about why we need recreation ecology. So back when I was kind of knee deep or thigh deep or hip deep in recreation ecology study, Jeff Marion and Scott Reed were some of the big names. And they said, America is in danger of loving its parks to death. The same is happening in our climbing areas. And we are at some level loving our climbing areas to death. As everybody knows, as every news article has said in the last 2 to 3 years, that's only happening more and more since COVID, and people are looking to get outside, looking to stay active. Recreation ecology can help us to direct those actions more effectively. Now, in order to understand impact, it's useful to kind of have a conceptualization of kinds of impact. Broadly speaking, there's 2 different kinds of impact: resource impacts and experiential impacts. Let's look at the first one, 2 kinds of impact. So resource impacts is the first one. And as a little bit of an exercise activity, like for everybody to put up their thumb. Come on, let's see everybody put up their thumb. Great. Now put that thumb on your neck and now give it 3 kind of firm rubs. All right, do you feel anything? Do you see anything? No, you don't. But small impacts can aggregate into big consequences. And I dare anyone here to keep rubbing your neck like that for the remainder of this presentation. And if we all rubbed our neck like that for the remainder of this presentation, I guarantee you we would have some pretty heinous hickeys on our necks by the end of this. And that's the idea of resource impacts. Resource impacts are small impacts that aggregate into big consequences. We've all seen it. These are the obvious ones. It's things like littering at the crag. Maybe you can raise your hand if you've seen a candy bar wrapper or a gel pack recently at the crag, or I know I'm going to get more people with this one. Have you happened to see one of these in the last 3 years at your crag? Yeah, so that's littering. Littering is a resource impact. What is a resource impact? It's an impact to the land around us. It's happening to the land as opposed to experiential, which we'll look at in a minute. Other examples of some impacts at the crag: impacted bases. Climbers come in, they set their packs down right at the base, they set up their hammock, and they impact the base, the vegetation fades away. Or too many trails. You're headed straight up to the climb you want to climb versus using these easy to access, easy to follow, beautiful trails that have been provided. And then, of course, with littering comes habituated animals. That'd be another example of a resource impact. Habituated animals at your crag, campfires, and human waste, dog waste. That'd be another example of a resource impact, or tree damage. So resource impacts are things that are happening to the land around us at the crag. Now, the second kind of impact is experiential impact. Before we jump into experiential impact, can anybody name this crag, and in specific, this climb? And while we're waiting for somebody to name this climb, I know somebody here knows this climb. The rest of you, take a look closely and see if you can count how many people are climbing on this particular climb. Nate, do we have anybody that might know what this climb is?
We do. Misha wrote WG stands for the Whitney Gilman.
Whitney Gilman.
Whitney Gilman read
Indeed.
John Cannon.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, congrats to Misha. It's a lovely climb. If y'all haven't checked it out before, you should. Just don't check it out on like a Memorial Day weekend or something. Because in this picture, if you look really closely, I can count at least 8 climbers. And this is only on pitches 2 through 5. And so experiential impacts are those kinds of impacts that come to us as human beings when we are at a crag that, for example, might have crowding going on. And with that crowding comes some noise, right? You got several parties shouting up and down here, on belay, off belay. I was here for a nice, serene, kind of wild experience, and suddenly that experience is being impacted. Visual impacts. You know, outdoors people, they just don't seem to know the color tan. And that upsets some people. So there's visual impacts along the way. And I don't climb at Rumney a lot, but if you climb at Rumney, inevitably, you're going to be getting set to send your project while somebody at the base is sitting there getting ready to set their next initial product offering or launch their next startup or close the next business deal. Technology now follows us to the crag, and it has some experiential impacts for us. And then, of course, there's climbing customs. Sometimes you show up at an area and the bolts are run out. That's going to affect your experience, maybe affect your range of climbs possible. On the flip side, a grid bolted area might have a impact to another climber. So these are resource impacts, experiential impacts, 2 different sorts of impacts. And with any categories we create in life, the moment we create a category, of course, we create contradictions. Often resource and experiential impacts overlap. And so resource and experiential impacts overlapping. For example, you got litter. That's a resource impact. And then you've got people, and people get sort of upset by litter. That would be an experiential impact due to the resource impact. So there is some overlap there. So those are a bit of the problem, and let's examine why that problem occurs. Now, when you break it down, impact can occur through 5 areas, 5 kind of categories for why climber actions can cause some impact. The first of these is the careless climber. That's the simplest one, the careless climber. Imagine this has happened to you. I know it has. You're at the crag, you're working on a climbing project, you come back down to the ground, you're completely exhausted, you take your chalk bag off and you throw it on the ground, and suddenly there's a puff of cloud chalk everywhere, a pile of chalk, and that's going to take at least 2 or 3 good northeastern rainstorms before that thing goes away. That's a careless person at the crag causing impact. But there's other people at the crag too. Oh, look, here they come now, the uninformed person. Imagine an uninformed person, for example. Is there anyone in this audience, this isn't a northeastern problem, but anyone in the audience familiar with cryptobiotic soil? Any takers? Cryptobiotic soil. You've climbed in Moab. You've climbed around the Southwest. Anybody, Nate? Joe's got it. Cryptobiotic soil.
It refers to soil that's living, and if you walk on it, you kill it. And I've read, it could take hundreds of years to recover.
Right on. Yeah. Yeah. Very, very, very true. Yeah, it's in the Southwest. It's not a Northeast problem, but yeah, it's a fungal or algal sort of life that grows on the soil, as Joe just said there. And if you step on it, well, and so it protects from desert erosion. And if you step on it, you can kill it for a long, long time. Problem is, it's pretty hard to recognize. So an uninformed person from the Northeast who shows up in the Southwest to climb isn't even going to be thinking about cryptobiotic soil. That would be an example of an uninformed person causing some impact. Then you got your unskilled person. Well, with the gym to crag transition that we've all seen, at the gym, looks to me like the rope goes up over a pole and back down. And so I know I've seen it twice now in the last 5 years anyway, twice now. If you've seen it, raise your hand. But twice now, people come to the crag and they know that they're supposed to set up some kind of an anchor with a cordelet or something like that, but they don't know the appropriate knot to do so. And so instead of that, they're like, well, I do know what you're supposed to do at the gym, and that's you put the rope up over a pole and it comes back down on the other side. And that's an unskilled person girdling a tree with a top rope line. That's a third kind of detrimental climber action. It's happening because they're unskilled. A fourth kind is the unavoidable impact. And perfect example of that is rescue situations. Now, we could argue about why that rescue had to occur or might have occurred, but ultimately, when a rescue needs to happen, let's say we have a helicopter evac and we need to cut down some trees so that a helicopter landing pad is possible. That would be an example of a rescue, a rescue situation, and that'd be an example of an unavoidable impact. The last are the tricky and sad ones. Those are the illegal activities. And again, not necessarily a problem in the Northeast, but perfect example might be, say, stealing of petroglyphs at crags in the Southwest. People stealing ancient artwork for profit from the crag. And so those are 5 different reasons, distinctly different reasons why impact occurs. And different types of climber actions require different types of strategies. Now, there's a famous psychologist, Abraham Maslow. Abraham Maslow said, if your only tool is a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail. But as strategic, skillful, elegant local climbing organizations, we've got to have more tools in our toolbox than a hammer. When it comes time to screw things in, we got to have that screwdriver. When it comes time to sharpen things up, we got to have the file. So this is all about understanding what the problem is and what the most effective tool is for solving it. Now, moving ahead a little bit, we looked at the 5 detrimental actions. It's important to also understand that there are a few psychological inputs and influences that play into all of those things. The first of which is considering that beyond the fact that just having the skills or knowledge of what to do, social and psychological influences can intervene in 4 different ways. So first of all, imagine the person who has a lack of ability to accurately interpret the situation and the needed behavior. It's not that they're trying to do something wrong, but it's at some level, and it's not even that in the last, we looked at the detrimental actions, it's not that they don't even have the skills, but they just can't interpret the appropriate situation to apply the skills. For example, a climber, they know how to rappel. They get to the top of a climb. They know that aluminum is a softer material than steel, but they don't recognize the difference between aluminum and steel rings in the real reality. And so instead of rigging up a rappel, they lower off. That'd be an example there. Sometimes it's a similar situation. They have a lack of ability to properly recall the appropriate behavior. So they know what to do, but due to perhaps some social stressors or anxieties, they can't recall the appropriate behavior. You could imagine a climber who knows how to sport lower. They've done it a couple of times, but today's a really busy day at the crag and they're a little bit nervous. So instead of doing the sport lower that they pretty much know how to do, they decide, I'm just going to rappel. But it's a busy day at the crag. A wrap takes longer than a sport lower, and pretty soon there's a line waiting to get on the climb. Now, a quick check for learning along the way. the line that begins to form at the base of that climb. What kind of impact is that? Raise your hand, please, if you think that's an experiential impact. How are we doing, Nate? I see it. Yeah, I see. The hands are going up. The hands are going up. Yeah, that's an experiential impact. Precisely. Well, there's a couple of other psychological influences along the way as well. And we've got the influence of ethics on the way a person makes decisions. And so, for example, imagine the climber who believes first in time, first in right. They get to the crag at 8 a.m. It's a super popular 5/8. Everyone wants to be on it, and so do they. In fact, they want to be on it with their crew all day long. And so nobody else gets to climb that climb. That would be an example of a person who, because of their ethical and value decisions and basis, that's why the impact is occurring. The last one is social pressures, i.e. peer pressure, something we all know so well. The climber who knows they shouldn't cut switchbacks, but hey, all my friends are doing it. So they cut some switchbacks too. And in cutting those switchbacks, they create some new vertical trails that the rain just races down. That creates some erosion, and that subsequently creates also some stream siltification. Raise your hand if you think that would be a resource impact. Good, it's stacking up. I think we got this. So, different kinds of, there are essentially 5 different kinds of things that influence climber behavior and 4 different additional psychological influences. And each of those can create experiential impacts and they can create resource impacts. And so we need to look at, now we understand some of the problems, we need to look at how we can address these problems, managing impacts. And broadly speaking, there are 3 different ways to manage impact in the climbing world. There are regulations. Whoops. Let's go back. There are regulations, site management, education. And the important thing to remember is it's not like one of these is necessarily better than the other, but to realize that each of these may be an effective tool with the particular climber and climbing problem you're dealing with, whether it's a careless, unskilled, uninformed, unavoidable, or even illegal situation, and the various psychological influences going along, social anxiety, peer pressure, etc. Each of these avenues have strengths and they have limitations. Let's look at them. So, regulation. This is something we've probably experienced in life, if not at the crag, maybe on the highway. It's using laws, rules, fines, punishment, or other kinds of measures to accomplish the goal. Examples of this at the crag? Well, imagine this: private propriété, no trespassing, fine, $150. That's an example of regulation, right? It's kind of looking at fines or other kinds of restrictive measures. But it can work. It can work. But what are the limitations of this kind of approach? Well, one of the limitations of the regulation approach is that kind of experience perhaps some of us have experienced at various points on various highways in our life, when it's like, hey, you know you're on private property, you know it's no trespassing, and the fine is $150. So what do you think is a limitation of that kind of an approach? Maybe an experiential kind of an impact? I don't think any of us really enjoy coming against the enforcers. That's definitely an impact that happens. But there's more to that, or more limitations to regulation than that. Other kinds of limitations to regulation? Well, let's see. Recently, I happened to see it that in Burlington, we were hiring for police lieutenant. The salary was $85,000 to $100,000. Regulation is not cheap. Having a person there to enforce the rules is not cheap. We don't often hire people at our LCOs for $100,000 a year, but we do ask for volunteers, and it can be hard to find volunteers to be there all the time. Well, there's other limitations also beyond the experiential and the cost. Raise your hand if you've ever been caught speeding. I'm raising several hands currently right now. Yeah. All right. Now I don't know if you can take your hand down on a Zoom program, but take your hand down if you were speeding and you knew a cop was there doing radar on you. Right. Yeah. All the hands went down. When the cat is away, the mice play. So regulation only really has effect when the enforcement body is in place and when some kind of a punitive measure might conceivably occur. So that is definitely another limitation. That said, it does have its strengths. Remember the person that was doing illegal activity, stealing petroglyphs. No amount of other measures may appeal to that person, and ultimately they might only do or not do something based on the fact that they could be punished for it, sadly enough. So, you know, when do we use this at our, or should we use regulation? Well, you know, interestingly enough, I drive a Prius, and I just recently had a friend whose Prius's catalytic converter got stolen out of it. And I did some research and I found out that catalytic converter theft is definitely on the uptick, and especially among Priuses. Well, so maybe we could install a security camera at our Crag parking lots, and maybe we could ask local law enforcement to start doing more patrols of the area. But we do need to understand that there are some limitations and detrimental sort of side effects of that. So should we use regulation? Perhaps, but perhaps sparingly. Fortunately, there are other tools in our toolkit: site management and education. Let's look at site management. So site management is essentially modifying an area so as to encourage users to behave in a particular kind of a way. And so basically, that's kind of a big phrase. To kind of ease it up or make it more simple, think about site management like this. God bless people. I love people, but they're lazy. People are lazy. They mean well, but they're lazy. The good news is if you give these well-meaning, lazy people an easy way to do something, they will do it. That's what site management is all about. It's the idea that if you control the environment, if you control the situation, if you control all of that, you control their minds. And if you control their minds, you control their behavior. This kind of concept, site management, more or less occurs in other fields. If you look at the field of economics, they talk about nudges. If you look in the field of politics, they talk about benevolent paternalism. Those are kind of similar in some ways to site management. The idea that if you give an easy solution, people will take it. So imagine the crap problem that you've got at your crag. You've got a crap problem. How are you going to solve it? You put in a pit toilet and people are going to use it. Even the most unskilled person who doesn't know how to dig a cat hole, they're going to go to the toilet instead of leaving their feces on the ground nearby. Or you got the litter problem. People are carelessly putting litter into their pockets and it's falling out at the trailhead and it's littering up the place. Put in a trash can, and of course, they're going to just put it in the trash can. So those are a couple of examples of kind of big infrastructure projects per se, the toilet, the trash cans of site management. There are some more subtle kinds of, yes, more subtle kinds of things that we can do. And for example, a couple of things I integrate into my climbing day when I'm working with groups at the Crags are subtle kinds of site management techniques that work very well. Let's say I'm working with a group and we've got to fill out our forms at the beginning of the day. Instead of telling the group, hey, everybody, I'd like for you to get yourselves in a circle. Everybody get in a circle. No, that's not a circle. Get in a circle kind of thing. I just put the forms on a clipboard. I arrange those clipboards in a circle, and then everybody gets in a circle. I control the environment, so I control their mind, so I control their behavior. Other examples, the climbing day gets going. We're ready to lead up a climb. I ask a climber, hey, are you right-handed or left-handed? If they're right-handed, I stack the rope 2 feet to the right of them. I don't even have to tell them where to stand. They just go there and do it. I've controlled the situation. I'm controlling their mind, and I control their behavior. Last little example here is now we've got the top rope set up, and you know, of course, you see it at the Crag, the enforcer, and they're like, don't step on the rope. Oh, you never step on the rope. You're going to destroy the rope. You're going to kill us all. Don't step on the rope. Well, I don't like being the enforcer at the Crag. I like being the instructor at the Crag. So what I do is once I've determined how much slack is at the bottom of the climb, I coil it up and I set it aside. I've controlled the situation. I control their mind. I control their behavior. So there's easy ways for us to do this and some more complex ways. But what are the strengths of site management? Well, one strength is it really works. It works well, but it doesn't work well for everybody. Fences might help keep us away from the cryptobiotic soil for those people that are unaware or maybe unskilled or maybe careless, but it's not going to do much to keep a thief away from the petroglyphs on the other side of that fence. So it does have its limitations. Other limitations are, and I'm really curious about this question, I would love to know the answer, is a pit toilet at a Crag, like the kind of pit toilet that exists at Rumney. Has anybody here been involved in the installation of a pit toilet at a Crag? Anybody? I actually really do want to know the answer. Yeah, all right, Jeremy. I want to know, how much did that project cost?
I think it was around $7,000 to $8,000.
Okay. Was that just like chump change in your climbing organization's pockets, or was that a lot of money?
It was a fair amount of money, but we got a $25,000 grant that we're slowly using to build the pit toilets and service them. So we're on our second. We're going to be putting in a third, maybe a fourth.
Right on. Well, wow. And hey, where is that, out of curiosity?
Red River Gorge.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I look forward to using your pit toilets in the future, Jeremy.
Our first one was in the mother lode, so
okay.
head there and you can check it out.
I will. All right. Well, cool. So now I know about $7,000 for a pit toilet. And so that points to a little bit of one limitation to site management. It's effective, but it can be costly. A pit toilet. Now, actually, hey, maybe if we can get Jeremy back here again, we could look at another disadvantage. The pit toilet, so it's $7,000 to build. Every month, what are you paying to get that thing cleaned?
So it's not a composting toilet. It's a vault toilet, and I think it's not that much, honestly. So we might be only spending $1,000 a year to service the 2 toilets.
Good. Wow.
But
Right on.
and it might actually be a little less than that, but
Wow.
they are readily accessible by a truck because they're in parking lots. But would be obviously a very different story if it was not accessible by a pump truck.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So limitations to site management is not only do you have to put the item in there, but you got to maintain it. So the pit toilets need to be cleaned. The trash cans need to be emptied. That's definitely a limitation to site management as well. So it can often be an expensive solution to the problem. Fortunately, there are some inexpensive kinds of ways we can utilize site management. For example, Crags, Vermont. A few years ago, we got a new property called Bolton Dome, and some of the trail builders, I believe one of them's here tonight, Misha Torin. Some of the trail builders were forward thinking enough to imagine that not only should we build trails, we should periodically build little alcoves that groups can use as sort of a classroom area or a pull-off area to put down their packs. And hey, you know what? Given the option between putting my pack into a bunch of bushes and putting it in a nice little cleanly outlined alcove area, that's what everyone's doing. I just used that classroom area 2 days ago for an SPI that I was teaching. So we can use site management to control the environment, control people's minds, and control their behavior. The last of the three, regulation, site management, and then the third way that we can influence climber behavior and mitigate impacts is the most exciting of them, really, and that is education. And when you look back at some of the literature in recreation ecology, there's a fellow, James Bradley, who worked for the House of Representatives, and he said, education is a preemptive strike to teach American people how to destroy the wilderness without destroying it, or how to enjoy the wilderness without destroying it. And of course, Marion and Reed had something to weigh in on it. Marion and Reed, they said climbing education is the most effective way to win hearts and minds. And all of that's kind of militaristic language, really. But the reality is climbing education represents an effective means for mitigating the impacts of overuse. So we should really both look at education and harness education in our crag management efforts. So education, examples of education. Well, it could be really simple. Remember we had the regulation sign, private property, no trespassing, fine, $150. Well, it doesn't get much buy-in from people. And it's only going to work maybe if there's a authority figure there. What if this sign said instead, private property, let's be good neighbors and preserve access. That's a quick, simple way to educate people at the crag. More complex ways of education might be, well, for example, this presentation on recreation ecology tonight. So education can be simple or it can be complex. Examples at the crag would be signage, representatives, and so on and so forth. Strengths of this approach. Well, you know, the beautiful thing is looking at who causes impact and why impacts occur. We had those careless people. We had the uninformed people. We had the unskilled people. All of those people can be reached through education. That is definitely a strength. The second thing is you all have a lot to share, a lot of information to share with people, and a lot of your volunteers do. And those people can help educate and do so in a very economical fashion. So education tends to be a rather economic way to address and mitigate impacts. So that's good. And then lastly, as was alluded to in the prior slide, education wins the hearts and minds. You educate somebody, you educate a cat, and when the cat, or you educate mice, I guess, mice, you educate mice, and when the cat is away, the mice will continue to do what is the best thing to do because they believe in the message. So education gets buy-in. Of course, there are some limitations to education. Unfortunately, perhaps, education might reach the person who has a different ethical or value system. That person, remember at the beginning here, when we were talking about a fellow who thinks that first in time at the climb is first in right, and they set up a top rope all day long. Maybe you could educate them and change their mind. But for a person who's motivated purely by the profit motive and they're stealing petroglyphs or things of that nature, they're not likely to respond to education. So it does have some limitations. Do we use education at the Crag? Well, I hope so, because really that is our most effective tool. We've got a community of receptive, supportive climbers who want to do the right thing, even if they may not know how to do the right thing. They want to do the right thing. And then we've got another whole group of people that know what is necessary at the Crag and are ready to share it with people. Now let's look at how education occurs, then maybe a quick little bit about how it can occur most effectively as we round the bend here in our look at recreation ecology. So thinking about education at the Crag, there are 3 different ways it happens. And it's kind of simple. Basically, it has to do with timing. So some education occurs far in advance, some occurs immediately before, some occurs during. Education far in advance. A perfect example of this would be a web posting last week from the Crag Vermont Instagram account. So social media posts are a great way to reach people in advance of their climbing. This is one from the Bolton Dome. We rent a parking lot. It has a 12-car limit at the parking lot. And so this was a social media post that went out. If you can read the fine print down at the bottom, it tells people there's a 12-car limit, and it gives them a solution, tells them park on Route 2. And then it kind of provides some reasoning. It gets that buy-in from people. It says overparking could jeopardize our lease agreement. Quick, simple education far in advance. Of course, also websites. I know all of you, or many of you in your LCOs have websites. And so, for example, if you're thinking about Bolton Dome here, and you're a couple from Brooklyn looking to come up to explore Vermont's exploding climbing scene, then you might do some research and you discover that Bolton Dome doesn't allow dogs. So it's time to look into a kennel versus having that couple show up and suddenly be forced to make what might be a bad decision, bring their dog to the Crag and jeopardize access. Climbing education can also occur immediately before. Let's say you missed the message. You're not on Instagram. Well, kiosks or signboards, sandwich boards like this one at Bolton Dome that again tells you the parking lot has a 12-car limit. And then if you happen to be that couple from Brooklyn who showed up with your dog at the Crag, you see down there, it says no dogs allowed. So at least we've now educated and informed people right before they're at the trailhead, they're about to launch into the experience, and we're informing them. Another perfect example, busy climbing weekends, stationing an LCO representative at the trailhead who's there to serve as an educator with people and let them know both what's expected of them and some ways that they can help to mitigate impact at the Crag. So in a few minutes, we're going to be rounding the bend here and hearing about successes from your LCOs in terms of mitigating user impacts. And I'd love to know how your LCO is doing this. And lastly, we'll look at education strategy during. So you've left your house, you've left the parking lot, and now you're at the Crag. Education that can happen in those instances, oftentimes it's quick, simple stuff by that point. Crag signage saying, hey, please only walk on the marked trails. Or maybe that LCO representative that was down in the parking lot welcoming people in the morning moves up to the Crag and provides some information about how to dig cat holes or where the best place to do such things are. That would be an example of a strategy during the episode. And you know, the best thing about it is with an education strategy during the climbing experience is that we've got a supportive climbing experience. And because we have a supportive climbing community, education often works. Our climbing community usually wants to do the right thing. They just may not know how to do it, or may not have the skills how to do it. And so we just need to help educate them. Now, of course, we need to educate them in an effective, welcoming kind of a way. So I'd like to wrap up this little look at education strategy and wrap up this whole presentation on recreation ecology with one tool that I think is super useful for the climbers in our community as they go about helping to educate people at the crag. And that's this idea of the authority of the resource, the authority of the resource. And so authority of the resource is basically the idea. It transfers authority from the manager, the land manager, or the local climbing organization, or the particular person. It transfers that authority to the things in nature that have their own requirements. Another way to think about this is that it's the standing shoulder to shoulder kind of approach versus face to face. So with a little bit of a pardon at the outset for my acting skills, I'd like to kind of do a little bit of a demo of what I mean here. Imagine that person at the crag, or you're at the trailhead, and you notice a person that they reach in their pocket, and when they pull their hand out, a wrapper falls to the ground. Now, the face-to-face approach would be to run up to that person, grab that wrapper, and be like, hey, I don't like it when people litter here. I don't like crags that are filled with litter. I want you to stop doing this behavior. That's the face-to-face approach. And my acting skills aside, I think that you can understand the ineffectuality of that approach. The authority of the resource is more that kind of like figurative shoulder to shoulder approach. It's the idea, same experience. You see the person who carelessly leaves a wrapper when they pull their hand out of their pocket, and you go up to them and you say, hey, isn't this a beautiful climbing day? And you kind of figuratively put your hand around their shoulder. And you're like, look at this beautiful place. I love coming here. That crystal clear stream over there, man. And so much green. It's so unspoiled. You know, I come from the city, and it's just not like that there. This place is beautiful. Yeah, is that what brings you here? Yeah. Well, hey, I did notice that when you pulled your hand out of your pocket, you dropped some litter on the ground. And, you know, if all of us keep doing that, there's going to be litter everywhere, just like the places we left. And pretty soon the animals are going to become habituated to the food in that litter. And pretty soon they're going to be in our packs. And none of us are going to like that. And so, well, I may not win an Emmy for that performance, but that's a little bit of that, a look at that shoulder to shoulder versus face to face kind of an approach. And so we should be using this messaging and outreach in our climbing programs. And in a few minutes, I'd love to welcome your input as to how. Now we're rounding the bend. We looked at what recreation ecology is. We looked at different types of impact. We looked at experiential impact and resource impacts. Sometimes they overlap, but they are two different categories. And then we saw some reasons that impact occurs. Broadly speaking, there are 5 reasons that impact occurs: careless, uninformed, unskilled, unavoidable, and illegal. Then we looked at some intervening kind of psychological influences that affect people. Sometimes they can't interpret the situation correctly, even if they have the skill. Sometimes there's a certain amount of like social anxiety or performance pressures. Sometimes there's ethical or values at their baseline that get in the way. And then lastly, social, or what we often call peer pressure, can influence people's behaviors. We looked at 3 different ways to manage impact: resource impact, regulation, site management, and education. And then, because education is so effective, and because we have a lot of great educators in our LCOs, we looked at educational timing: in advance, immediately before, and during. And then lastly, a little bit about educational approach, which is to say, harnessing that idea of the authority of the resource. Let nature speak for itself and approach things shoulder to shoulder versus face to face. And, you know, when we started this presentation, I was speaking with a bunch of experts. I've seen the names on here: folks from Access Fund, folks from climbing organizations around the region, climbing areas that I look forward to going to. All of those people are experts. You are already experts in recreation ecology. Recreation ecology was the water, and you all are swimming in it. But of course, the fish is the last to realize that it's in water. And so my goal tonight has been to take some of that water, some of those experiences you've had, some of that knowledge you have, and provide it with a container to put that water in. And if we put that water in a container, we can then more readily pack it up and take it to the crag or take it to our LCO meetings and more effectively determine what kind of impacts are occurring. Why might those impacts be occurring? What kinds of influences might be causing those impacts? And with that in mind, how can we best manage those impacts? What tools do we have in place? And so I hope you all take that container and move forward effectively in contributing all you already have. Thank you all for all you have contributed to your LCOs, and I hope you'll continue to do so. I don't know where we are time-wise, but if we have some time, maybe we can do a little Q&A, but it would also be wonderful to see any idea sharing. We've got some big names in LCO world here, and more than big names, I think we've got some big knowledge here, and I'd love to hear of ideas people have effectively used in managing and mitigating impacts at their climbing areas. Thanks.
Thank you, Kel. That's great. I think we are doing pretty well on time, so if we probably have another 15 or so minutes before we want to wind it down. If folks have something they'd like to share, maybe a question, maybe a success story, if you raise your hand, I'll invite you to unmute and ask your question or make your statement briefly. I think one ask that we would have just on the kind of the housekeeping side of things, keep the questions sort of about recreation ecology or kind of big picture. This is probably not the ideal forum for asking Kel how you should deal with some jerk and their dog at your crag or something specific like that. But if you have more general or maybe 10 or 20,000 foot view questions or statements, feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you and ask your question now. Well, people are, oh, Stephanie from the WMCC.
Oh, neat. Okay.
There you go. We can hear you.
Cool. Hi, everyone. Thank you. That was really, really great. And it's true, like we are kind of in this world and doing these things all the time, but it's super helpful to kind of have a structure to think about these things. So I've been thinking about a little bit of a success story and then have a question. We were privileged enough to open a pretty new crag called Hanging Mountain recently. And it's really cool to be able to kind of start from scratch almost, because we really took into account a lot of the way the trails and the belay platforms were structured to keep people where we wanted them. So I guess maybe a comment and kind of a question is like, you know, starting in the from scratch might be easier than after the fact. You know, a climbing area that's kind of just had a lot of use over the years, and people kind of behave in certain ways at the crag, and then trying to change that behavior can be difficult, and also kind of doing some retroactive work in there it's can be harder too. And then like also kind of part of the question is there's an area that we have had to close as well, and we've tried to do with some education, and I think we have some ideas about doing more education along those lines. And yeah, just I'm sure that's a kind of a big topic, is areas that are closed and how do we kind of encourage people to not climb in those areas.
Well, of course, I do not have all the answers, and maybe I don't even have any of the answers. But one thing that that I think about in situations like that, and actually we had a recently opened crag that was Bolton Dome, and so maybe it provides some ideas around that, is the idea of impact anticipation. And so I've always thought like the perfect example of human expectation versus reality is a college campus. And so for anybody that's ever been on a college campus, they know that buildings get built and sidewalks get put in like really pretty ways, in very architecturally elegant ways, and then people walk where they want to walk. And pretty soon you got the sidewalks, and then you have the paths where people actually go. And so impact anticipation is sort of that idea. It's almost like in the field of permaculture gardening, you know, sort of one of the, it's been a while since I've been in permaculture gardening, but one of the ideas is sort of that, you know, before you start a garden, you spend a long time studying and looking at where the shadows are, where the light is, and you do all of that observation before you stick a shovel in the ground. And so similarly, I think it's sort of a double-edged sword for us in the climbing world of, like, I would hesitate to say that, well, you know what, just like don't do anything at the crag and see the trails people put in, you know, kind of thing, because obviously that could be a bit of chaos. But on the other hand, I mean, just as one small example, I mentioned there's this beautiful little alcove classroom area that Misha had put in at the Bolton Dome, and then there's another. So the classroom area is here. The trail, one trail's here. There's another trail here, and for a long time, some people have been trying to bump from this trail down to that classroom area, and I've sort of been fighting it. I've been like throwing bushes in the way, trying to keep that from happening. But it's just, it seems like such a popular trail and such a popular thing to do that at some level now, it's like, I kind of feel like, yeah, like let's establish a sidewalk there. The people have spoken and this is what they want. So, you know, impact anticipation, that's, and then thinking about how users are actually going to use it. But then at some level, maybe, you know, you've gone into it with your own idea of how things should be, but at a certain point, maybe stepping back and being like, well, I know what I want, but how are people really going to use it? So I know that's not an answer, but that's my approach to it.
Thank you, Kel. Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, just a quick plug for Mountain and Bolton Dome are examples of crags where, rather than trying to repair something that was sort of already badly broken, these are crags where it was actually a fun challenge where we got to ask the question, like, what do we want this to look like? And we started to build that. And so we were able to use a lot of these recreation ecology tools, whether we knew that's what we were doing or not. It's been a lot of fun, because I know we also all have our challenges as well with overuse in crags where we're trying to change entrenched behavior. So thank you for that, Kel. Thank you, Stephanie. Much appreciated. We've got a hand up from Patrick from Ontario, an LCO in Ontario. Feel free to unmute.
Thanks.
Great, thank you.
So I guess we talked about education, and I often think, as in my day job, I do lectures, and like, I just say stuff to people, and it just kind of goes, right? And so like mentorship or one-on-one is often more effective, and we've tried to say, hey, you should find a mentor, be a mentor, but it's limited by, for instance, mentor supply and finding mentors. I was wondering if you had thoughts about that as well.
Thank you.
Well, I guess for me, I have always carried in mind the idea that before people care what you know, they have to know that you care. And so for me, a mentor doesn't have to be like the most super uber knowledgeable person. It just has to be a person that knows some things and really cares and can express that caring and can express it in an effectual kind of a way with that shoulder to shoulder approach. And then maybe if we look at it from that way, that might expand the mentorship pool in the sense that you don't have to know everything to know something, and you don't have to know everything to care, and you don't have to know everything to be able to share what you know. You just need to know how to do it in an effectual, respectful kind of a way. So I don't know the specific situation or problems you're dealing with, but that's kind of like my general thoughts and approach on the matter. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it makes sense to like get people to think, well, you don't want the guy who just started climbing last week to be a mentor, really. But the guy who's been climbing for 3 years is probably a totally fine mentor, right? And so I think it is useful to get more people into the mentoring game.
Yeah, and then as we get them into the mentoring, perhaps trying to give them some tools, and not just, because we're talking about like the technical skills of climbing, and a person who just started last week may not be the greatest mentor. But the truth of the matter is the person who has been climbing all their lives but just really doesn't know how to communicate it in an approachable manner might be at best neutral, if not negative, as a kind of a mentor. So so maybe trying to focus more efforts on communication strategies. I mentioned that one, the shoulder to shoulder thing, but communication strategies for those people, I think, would be key.
Kel, can I share one sort of maybe related success story on that idea? And then, of course, I would invite another. I think we have at least time for one more hand to go up or question if somebody wants to chime in while I'm talking. But we have had a challenge recently at Hanging Mountain with someone who's kind of well known in this area. His I don't want to say his name, but it starts with a K and ends with Evan. But Evan has a dog that runs off leash at the crag, even though we have a leash rule. So that goes to the regulation piece. He disregards the rule, not because of a lack of education. We've certainly tried having conversations with him. So there's been some confrontations with folks at the crag who spoke up. So I was somewhat confrontational. It didn't work. Some folks reached out to him on social media, and that just led to what social media is good at, which is just creating kind of like agita and arguments and stuff. So it was sort of unsuccessful, and he hasn't been swayed. So I took a slightly different approach, which was I reached out to him through a friend, and I said, Kevin is a carpenter. Means he's good with tools, he's good with his hands, he's a hard worker. We need people like that to volunteer at our crag days, because we're trying to build a lot of stuff, belay benches, doing masonry, trail building, kiosk building, whatever it is. He has a handy skill set. I bet if we could pull him in, it's kind of that shoulder to shoulder approach. Let's get him at a trail day. If he puts a little blood and sweat into Hanging Mountain, I don't see how it couldn't help but sort of change his behavior, or at least create a partner out of someone who's historically been a problem. And so I think a lot of our LCOs have those trail days, and usually our reaction is to kind of keep at arm's length, or to keep away from us the people who are problems, or the people we don't like. But sometimes if you can swallow your pride a little bit and invite those people into an event, there's nothing like putting a pickaxe in their hand to make them a believer in the work that we do. And so that's one. I won't call it a success story yet. It's kind of remains a work in progress, but I think it's an untried tactic that I think is attempting to utilize that shoulder to shoulder approach rather than the confrontational regulatory approach, which is not working with him at all.
Yeah. And, you know, and what you're tapping into right there is, you know, what in at some level in psychology, they call cognitive dissonance. And so I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. I'll try to keep it contained. But there's a psychologist named Elliot Aronson, and he's well known in the cognitive dissonance world. I'm no psych expert. I'm just an armchair kind of psych guy. But anyway, I did go to a presentation he gave once, and so there was this situation. He was studying sort of like how to get college students to use sexual protection sort of thing. And so slightly risque story here. But anyway, he tried a couple different interventions. The first one he did, he showed like a shock and awe video of like, if you don't use some kind of protection during sex, you could end up with all kinds of crazy diseases. Look at these crazy diseases, plus people getting pregnant. And look how that, you know, oftentimes that doesn't work out well for anybody involved. So that was the shock and awe. And so the shock and awe technique, it worked really, really, really well for about a week. And then after a week, all the students were like, yeah, I know, but then it's so much fun to kind of just do it the natural way. So I'm going to do that. And so it didn't really have a lasting power. So then the second intervention was they kind of came up with these like kind of like soft core. Other important point was the students were like, yeah, I'd really like to do that to avoid the problems, but using condoms is kind of awkward. I don't really like that. And so they came up with these kind of like soft core sort of videos where it's like, it made it all kind of more accessible and attractive to use a condom in the process, and showed those videos to some college students. And the college students were like, yeah, okay, that seems like a decent tool. Maybe I'll try that. And so they tried that. And lo and behold, for many of them, it was not nearly as attractive in reality, you know, as it was in the Hollywood kind of film. So then the third intervention was this. Elliot Aronson, he said, hey, you college students, we've got a problem. The students down at the local high school, they're not using protection. We need, or I need you to help me go educate these high school students about why they should be using protection when having sex. And so the students came up with a program, went down to the high school and educated the high schoolers. And then when Aronson looked at both the responsiveness rate and the staying rate, or sort of like the longevity rate of those students, it was incredibly much more. And so that seems to me kind of like a bit of what you're doing with the situation there at your crag. You're inviting him in, you're inviting him to sort of like be a part of the solution at the crag, so that he doesn't want to be a part of the problem at the crag anymore. And at some level, I mean, this could kind of be pushing it, but like it would be kind of wild to see if one of the projects was like a hitching post where you hitch your leash dog to the hitching post at the crag, and like you asked him to build that. I know it's probably a bridge too far, but
I love it.
Wow, I would love to know how that research study goes.
I love it. TBD. I'll report back to the group.
Yeah.
I think we want to wrap this up in the next minute or two. If anyone has a quick comment, I'd be happy to take that. And if a hand goes up, we'll call on it. But I also want to be respectful of everyone's time as well. while we wrap this up, first of all, thank you, Kel. Incredible. One of my favorite takeaways from today, but it's also the same takeaway that I had from the AMJ meeting, was just that I wish someone would have shared this with me when I was new to LCO work. Not because a lot of this is intuitive to those of us who have been doing it for a while, but I like the framework, and it's a good reminder because I think I sit in a lot of committee meetings and planning meetings for crag management. And a lot of times when we're dealing with a problem, our first reaction is always sort of regulatory or punitive. And this is a really powerful reminder that there are other tools, that the regulatory, more punitive model kind of has costs, sometimes is appropriate and necessary, but that we have these other tools in our toolkit. And so what are we missing? Sometimes we miss the forest of the trees by just going automatically to enforcement. But thank you for that reminder, Kel. I appreciate this a lot. We're going to make this recording available to your LCOs. As I said in the beginning, I think like where my mind goes to this is that anyone who is new to your LCO leadership, anyone who is new to your crag management committees, maybe anyone who joins your board of directors, this might be like a good free training tool that you can use to share with them as they're kind of onboarding. They may bring expertise from other areas, but if they're new to this work, I think this is a great place for them to start. And as they start to think about how to apply their skills to crag management and the LCO work that we all do. So thank you very much for attending. Thank you, Kel, for your time in the presentation. And thank you for sharing this, everyone. We wish you a lot of good luck in your work. We need you. It's very important work that you're doing. And let's just keep sharing the info, sharing the knowledge, and supporting groups around the country as they try to preserve access to these climbing resources while at the same time protecting them from abuse and overuse. So thank you, Kel. Appreciate it very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Nate, for making it happen.
Excellent. Well, we'll make the recording live on our website in a couple of days. Thanks, y'all. Keep in touch.